Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. And RJ, we have waited an hour and a half after when we would normally start recording, just in case of any deep dive curses this week.
Yeah, I don't even know what news there could be realistically, but just to make sure, I don't know, it's not going to work, Dylan. I think last week was as much proof as we could possibly need of that.
Unreal level of deep dive cursing last week. Appreciated everybody having fun with that. But yes, we wait for a head coaching announcement, decide to talk about Lambert as a candidate finally, and then a couple hours later he's named the head coach. Unreal.
Yep. Deep Dive Curse is undefeated. And yeah, we really did appreciate all your messages, even a video left for us about the Deep Dive Curse. We got a really good laugh out of all of that. So just love you guys, great community, and just it really took the sting out of another, maybe the worst Deep Dive Curse yet.
It really is. I mean, lots of people were like genuinely starting to think, RJ, that the Kraken wait for us to talk about something before they then can announce it. I don't know. It's getting close for me being like 100% on board with that.
Yeah, I just still don't think we have that kind of power, but there's a lot of correlation going on here. And as we know, correlation always equals causation. So maybe there is something to
it. Absolutely does, RJ. Anyway, of course, this week we are going to be talking a lot about Lane Lambert. We're going to talk about his background, what systems he ran when he was head coach with the New York Islanders, and then also what we think the fit is going to be now that he is officially named head coach of the Seattle Kraken. Got some re-signing to talk, a re-signing to talk about as well. And then if we have time, hopefully talk some PWHL Seattle stuff as well at the end. If not, then we'll probably have to push it to next week, unfortunately. But before we get into that and talking about Rico, I wanted to also thank the community for saying hi to us at the equipment sale the other day, because we had lots and lots of people come up to us and say hi, both when we were together and then also when we were separate. But it was really nice to be able to have that interaction with everybody kind of this far after the season ended, right? Just being able to be around that many Kraken fans again, being able to communicate with people, being able to, give out pins, handshakes, whatever. It was just great being able to see as many of you as we were able to see.
Yeah, I missed it. Really, it's been almost 2 months since the season ended, and we really just don't get as many opportunities like practices, games, and everything during the off season to connect and meet with the people who are listening to this podcast right now. And so it was really great to be able to do that at the equipment sale. Found some cool stuff as well, Dylan. You got a new pair of gloves. You get to channel the hands of Mitchell Stevens. So excited to see how those work out for you.
Yeah, no, it should be great. They are great. Like they're like really great gloves. I'm really excited for them. Thank you for grabbing those for me.
Yeah, and it was also cool seeing on our Discord too, some of the fans showing off the haul that they got at the equipment sale and everything too. It was cool to see all the stuff you guys got.
Yeah, were you able to tell whose pants you now have?
I don't think they were a player's pants. They're pretty small for that. I don't know. Maybe I don't know why a coach wouldn't be wearing. I don't know. There's always miscellaneous gear that shows up at the equipment. So there's a pair of Minnesota Wild pants as well. So it's just stuff ends up there. But thankfully, it was a good fit. I don't think they're any players though. They were size medium.
The only player it could have been would be Bjorkstrand.
Yeah, actually,
the only player I can think that would be thin enough, right?
I would think so, but they didn't even. It wasn't even like the Kraken pants gels where they had like the logo and everything on the front. So
yeah,
I think it was just not anything from a player. But the cool that you got the gloves though. There were some interesting gloves there. I saw a pair of Shane Wright gloves that actually lasted a long time.
Yeah, no, that one was surprising. That was very surprising. But yeah, no, the gloves are great. Really excited for them, and yeah, really excited just to see everybody that was there. It was just nice to be able to communicate with the community again and see how many great Kraken fans still, follow and appreciate this team even this deep into the off season. And another Kraken fan who loves this team no matter what time of year is, of course, our wonderful sponsor, Rico Tessendor. Want to give another big shout out to him for sponsoring the podcast there, the offices of Rico Tessendor. While we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9 9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. And Rico, I mean, it's been a minute since we've heard from Rico as well, talking about, not running into stuff. Rico, whose gloves would you want? I think that's a good question.
Let us know, because he does email us, especially after some of these great ad reads too. And I know he's been a fan of a lot of them. Usually he'll just say, "Fantastic job, guys! Love it! It's the best." So always good to get that feedback from Rico. But yeah, Rico, let us know whose gloves you want.
Yeah. And for anybody else, let us know in the comment section as well. Would love to hear. All right, RJ, the big news as far as movement with the Kraken on the player side of things was that we have another re-signing. Of course, last week we talked about John Hayden's re-signing. We have another player re-upping with the Seattle Kraken.
That's right. So the Kraken re-signed Josh Mahura to a 2-year deal with a cap hit of $907,500. Got to get that little 0.5 in there at the end. But I think just like the John Hayden signing, this is a good deal for both sides. On Josh Mahura's side, this does come in a little bit below the projected value for the contract on a 1-year deal, but he does get a second year there for a player who, has been in his career, maybe struggled to be, in the lineup in the NHL regularly, but he does get that security of a second year. And then for the Kraken, I mean, you lock up this great 6th defenseman you had last season. I think he fit really well on the team, and at a cap hit that's very affordable. I mean, not that much above league minimum, still under the $1 million mark, and an amount that, I mean, even if everything were to somehow go wrong, you could even put in the minors and it's not going to cost you anything from a cap perspective. So another good bit of business by Jason Botterill. He hasn't had the opportunity as a GM to do a whole lot of things quite yet, but I mean, 2 for 2 on these re-signings, I think.
Oh, definitely. Love the John Hayden one. We talked about that last week. Love this one as well. I thought Josh Mahura did a great job of stepping in, playing third pairing minutes for the Kraken last year, being a pretty steady force when he was in the lineup for them. And I think that that's going to be something that they, as you transition into another head coach and everything like that, I think having somebody who is a little bit more of a veteran presence that you can lean on at times is going to be something that's going to be valuable for them on the back end. Do we read anything into this as far as, Kraken on paper, RJ didn't have a ton of openings on that blue line. We know Ville Ottavainen was able to get up and get a game in at the tail end of last season. Are we thinking that this maybe means there's not as much room for him, or are we thinking that this is just going to come down to a training camp battle for that final spot between maybe Mahura, Ottavainen, and maybe even a someone else?
Well, I think it could be a training camp battle. The Kraken don't have a lot of defense prospects that are ready to go right away for a full-time role, which is part of why I think you see this signing here with Mahura. But even then, I mean, you look at this offseason, and there's still a potential name like a Jamie Alexiak that if a deal came along could get moved. I think we'll talk about it later. I think he will be a good fit in Lane Lambert's system if the Kraken want to hang on to him. But, there's still some flexibility on this blue line. But overall, I think the Kraken like the blue line they have. I mean, they've got guys 1 through 6 under contract, with the exception of Riker Evans, but he will get re-signed. There's no concern about that. So they're going to have a lot of stability there as far as that D unit. And so, we'll see if a guy like Ottavainen can really make someone think, but also injuries happen. You're not ever just going to play with the same 6 defensemen all season, despite what almost happened a couple of years ago. Aside from the Vince Dunn injury, it looked like it was tracking that way, but you're going to have opportunities open up anyway. And so you're going to need depth with someone like a Mahura for that.
Definitely. And again, you can't do better than this contract for somebody who's able to provide that presence that Mahura is able to provide. So really happy to have him around for another 2 years. All right, RJ, let's just go ahead and jump right in. Lane Lambert is the next head coach of the Seattle Kraken. Somebody we talked about, obviously, the last podcast. We knew he was in conversation to be that next head coach for the Kraken. He was still a candidate at that time. Although he might not have been, actually, given that they announced it a couple hours later. It's possible that the deal was finalized and they just hadn't announced it yet.
It probably was the time we were talking about it. But the report that we were going off of was from Elliot Friedman that he had interviewed with the Kraken and that it had gone well.
Yeah.
I think we can read into that report now. I think we could probably say that was likely true.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, Lane Lambert is the 3rd head coach in Seattle Kraken franchise history. RJ, we talked about him like conceptually last week, but let's actually get into who Lane Lambert really is, what we think he's going to bring to this team. What's his background? Like, let's start there. Let's just kind of inform people where Lane Lambert is coming from.
Yeah, and so we went over it briefly a little bit last week, but I think we want to dive a little deeper into it now that he is the actual coach. So Lane Lambert, he is 60 years old, so he's not one of the coaches on the younger side that we had talked about. He has a pretty extensive coaching resume that we can look into. Before that, though he was an NHL player, second round pick of the Detroit Red Wings in 1983, spent some seasons in Detroit, then with the Rangers and Quebec Nordiques, before playing minor league hockey and European hockey for a little while. But as far as his coaching career, he did start in the WHL as an assistant with the Moose Jaw Warriors, then became head coach of the Prince George Cougars for a couple years before joining the Bridgeport Sound Tigers, the Islanders AHL team, for 1 year as an assistant coach under Dave Biseggio, who is the head coach of that team, who is actually now a pro scout for the Seattle Kraken. So some more Kraken connections there.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to the Nashville Predators organization as a coach with the Milwaukee Admirals, an assistant for 1 year, then became their head coach for 4 years. And then after that, went up to the big club with the Nashville Predators as an assistant coach under Barry Trotz. And so remember that name, Barry Trotz, because it's going to be very important in Lane Lambert's history, because he was then an assistant coach under Barry Trotz for the next 11 years with the Nashville Predators, Washington Capitals, and New York Islanders, basically just following Barry Trotz wherever he went. And for those of you who are not familiar with Barry Trotz, legendary head coach. I believe he's top 5 all time in NHL in wins. And when he was coaching in the NHL, because now he's currently actually the GM of the Nashville Predators, transition that is not very common for a coach to make. But when he was a head coach in the NHL, you remember this still, and I'm pretty sure I've said it at various times on the Red Glare podcast when he was still a coach. He was always my favorite, or I thought the best coach in the NHL. He was the guy I thought was number one and the absolute best. So legend of a coach that Lane Lambert coached under here with 3 different organizations. So then the Islanders, after the 21-22 season, get rid of Barry Trotz as their coach. And so then they choose Lane Lambert to take over. And so he's head coach of the New York Islanders for the 2022-2023 season. They make the playoffs, lose in the first round. And then the next year, things fall apart a little bit, and we'll go into the details of everything that happened with the Islanders. But he is fired mid-season, January 20th, with a 19-15-11 record, replaced by Patrick Waugh, who's currently the head coach of the Islanders still. From there, he moves on to the Toronto Maple Leafs as an associate coach with them for last season. And so he works on their PK and works with their defense and everything, and then takes the job with the Seattle Kraken. So that's kind of his resume as an NHL coach.
Yeah. And I think, throughout that time, especially when he was under Barry Trotz at all of those various stops, coached all over the place as far as what his responsibilities were. And so that's one of the big things that the Kraken are getting here with Lane Lambert is somebody who has experience. Like, this is not just a defensive coach. This is not just a PK coach, right? Like, this is a coach who has, at one point or another worked with all of the different groups around an NHL team and has that experience with them, has that communication with them. And I think that brings a lot of versatility to this role. And I think that also helps really make you a head coach, material, right? Like, it gives you a lot of good avenues that you can then use as a head coach. The Islanders situation was what it was under him. I don't know that you could totally blame him for everything there, just because the Islanders are just such a strange organization these last like 5, 6, 7 years. But I do like that he has just so much history, so many times working with different groups, RJ. Like, that I think is something that should benefit him here in Seattle, where whether it's defense and shoring up the defense there, whether it's the forward group offensively working on manufacturing goals or being more creative there, or the forward group defensively helping out defensively, right? Forecheck, neutral zone, all of that stuff. Like, the Kraken needed help just about everywhere. And so getting a coach who has experience working in all of those different facets of the game makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. There's no shortage of experience in different areas on the resume. And I do want to get into that difference between assistant coach and associate coach, because
Mhm.
for those years with the New York Islanders, he was an associate coach. With the Toronto Maple Leafs, he was an associate coach. And in a lot of ways, it looks like the same thing. There's still an assistant coach on the bench and all of that, but it is one of those little mini promotions that you do get as an assistant coach when you are, I guess, kind of like a senior level assistant coach, really, when you take on more than the average assistant coach does. And so when you see associate coach, that's what that usually means. And I think it certainly applies in Lane Lambert's case, because he worked with the defensive group at times. He worked with the forwards group at times. He worked on the PK. He worked on special teams. And so he really, throughout his time under Barry Trotz had him wearing a lot of different hats at
Mhm.
various times, depending on what was needed for that particular team or that particular year. So I think there's certainly a robust amount of experience on that resume. But I do have a question for you, Dylan. When we look at his time as an assistant or associate coach, I'll just say assistant coach and it'll just
Yeah.
cover the whole thing, versus as a head coach with the Islanders. It was a very brief stint. How much weight, I guess, if we're looking at somebody's resume and trying to figure out what they'll bring to the Kraken, how much weight do you give to his time as an assistant versus as a head coach with the Islanders? Because they are very different roles.
They are very different roles. It's an interesting one because, we've talked about this before as we've gone through this coaching search thing now twice in the last two off seasons. It's one where I'm willing to not totally discount somebody's first stint as a head coach if this is going to be their second, but I do think I'm willing to kind of say like somebody can learn from that experience, right, of being a first time head coach, and then usually the second go around, right, they have more of a handle on things. I think the fact that he has been an assistant for so long, I think it's intriguing from the sense of there's a lot of experience there, a lot of accumulated knowledge and wisdom that you gather from being a part of an organization, working with that many different players, right? Like I just think of all of the players that Lane Lambert has worked with and all of the tips and tricks that he would have picked up from what they do in their game that then he can pass on to players on the Seattle Kraken squad. I think that that's important. The one part about it that makes me maybe a little cautious is essentially all of that time as an assistant was spent under Barry Trotz, right? Like
Yeah.
it was one person. Now, again, arguably there's nobody you'd rather have that be than Barry Trotz, but it is one of those things where I am kind of curious. As much as I say, like you work with all those different players, you learn things from them that you're able to then pass on to other people. I do feel like you also, when you're an assistant coach, you learn a lot from the head coach that you're under. Again, Barry Trotz, great mentor, great role model, great person to follow in the footsteps of. But I do wonder, like, that's the one thing about this resume that is maybe a little bit of like a, let's see how this goes kind of thing.
Yeah, and I wonder what to make of that as well, because I mean, of course, you want to be coaching under a legend of a coach. There's a lot you can learn from someone like a Barry Trotz. I'm sure a lot Lane Lambert has learned. But on the other hand, how much of that success, and there was a lot of success with Nashville, with
Mhm.
Washington, of course, he wins the Stanley Cup with Washington, and with the Islanders getting to a couple conference finals. There's a lot of success there, but how much of that do you attribute to Barry Trotz, this legendary head coach, versus the assistants under him? And so it just leaves questions that we can't really answer right now. It's hard to know, right? You kind of need all that together to work. And so how much success can be put on Lane Lambert? It's hard to tell. And the other thing too that maybe gives me a concern is that you look at Barry Trotz, and he's had other assistant coaches work under him that have gone on to have NHL jobs,
Mhm.
like a Todd Reardon or like a Jim Hiller. None of those guys have really gone on to have a ton of success to this point. And so, it does leave some questions too about, okay, how much of it was Trotz versus the assistants and how much can they grow into a head coaching role? But I think it's still too small of a sample size to really get any kind of takeaway we can use.
Which is another odd one given how long Barry Trotz coached.
Right.
Like the fact that the coaching tree doesn't have that many branches is like kind of an odd one given how long Barry Trotz coached and how successful he was. It's really it is kind of interesting there. But yeah, it is one I'm kind of interested to hear him talk, right? Like to have the opportunity to talk with Lane Lambert. We should get that introductory presser in the next couple days. We wanted to get a podcast out before that, but obviously we'll be covering that as much as we can. But I think that that's going to maybe tell us a lot too, just because, we've been around. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple interactions with Barry Trotz. Like, I know who he is, incredibly nice guy, knows so much about the sport, all of that kind of stuff, but has like a very unique demeanor about him, and I'm kind of curious to get that read on Lane Lambert to see like how much is he really kind of following Barry Trotz's footsteps as far as the attitude that you bring to an organization day to day. Because Barry Trotz, very nice guy, can be very jovial, can have a lot of fun, but boy, does he know exactly the times when you need to get serious, right? Whether it's in a practice or in a game, there's a lot of shots of Barry Trotz smiling on the bench, a lot of shots of him not smiling on the bench, right? Like he just seems to have this sixth sense of when you need to lock in and when the tone needs to shift for a team. And looking at this Kraken squad over the previous two head coaches, that's really been a struggle for them. And so does Lane Lambert kind of have that to him? Did he learn some of that from Barry Trotz? Like, I think that could be something that when we do talk about working with somebody for as long as he worked with Barry Trotz, if he was able to kind of pick up things like that, I think that, again, he can apply that to this Kraken squad and it should work pretty well.
And from what I've read, it sounds like Lane Lambert has that element to him as well.
Mm-hmm.
From the thing, I've done a lot of reading on Lambert in
Yeah.
the lead up to this podcast. I know we both have. And it sounds like that's kind of how he is as well, but it's not a side that the media ever really gets to see. That was one thing I read about him a lot, is that, he's got multiple dimensions to his personality and all that stuff, but the players are the ones who really get to see that. And to the media, he's kind of just straightforward and doesn't give you a whole lot, which of course he would hardly be the first coach
Yes.
to do that. So I am curious how much we actually get to see from that later this week as far as what he'll show to us. But it sounds like the persona that's shown to the media and the fans might be different than what's, kind of behind closed doors to the players.
Yeah. And then my question for you on this background stuff, RJ, is when the Kraken kind of released the statements that they did for the hiring of Lane Lambert, for considering that he does have previous head coaching experience, were you surprised at how often they mentioned his time with the Washington Capitals, kind of almost really over his time being the head coach of the New York Islanders? I thought that was kind of interesting in how all of the releases were phrased.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think if you are an organization that's trying to, as any organization would, try and spin things in the most positive light possible, I think you'd want to point to the area where he had the most success and where there's a Stanley Cup somewhere that you can point to. I think that is something you might want to look at, and also where he coached some players who are on the Kraken now, and a Burakovsky, a Grubauer, a Chandler Stevenson. So it allows you those tie-ins as well. But as we kind of get into the Islanders tenure, yeah, you know what? There is a playoff appearance there, but I understand why you might not want to lean into that if you're trying to portray things in the most positive light, as any team would. Because the more I look into that Islanders tenure, it gives me some concerns as far as how the team actually did in some of the underlying numbers there.
Yeah, and I kind of brought up some of that last week. Like the underlying numbers, when you look at it analytically, are at times kind of questionable. But at the end of the day, like it was a winning record, right? Like NHL points percentage of 559 in the 127 games he coached for them. Like, you know what I mean? Like 61 wins, 46 losses, 20 OTLs. Kraken fans would look at that and be like, "Hey, that's a pretty good squad."
Yes.
Like you, after these last 2 years, you absolutely take that. And so that's the one thing that I did find a little interesting is, like, if you were to tell Kraken fans right now that he could lead them to a 93-point season and a playoff berth, like everybody would be thrilled with that. And really, that's his experience in the one full season he has had behind a bench. Was he led the Islanders to a 93-point season and a playoff berth.
Right. And you're absolutely right about that. Kraken fans, I think, would certainly take that if that's what next year's results are. And I think when you dig a little deeper into it, maybe it's a little shakier, as we can do there now. But if those are the results, you take. And really, it's not even when I dig into these Islanders numbers, I don't even want to do it from a perspective of saying like, oh, this is danger. This is actually a lot more negative here. I just find it kind of odd and interesting, really, because you so rarely see this with a coach who has such a short tenure as a head coach and that really didn't get very long of a leash. Like a season and a half is not a long time. I know coaches don't have a long shelf life in the NHL, but this is really short considering that he didn't
Mhm.
have a record below NHL 500 at any point
Yeah.
here, even when he was fired. So let's look into it a little bit deeper though. And you look at the 2022-23 New York Islanders, the full season that he was a head coach, and they do make the playoffs. They are a 93-point team. We mentioned this a little bit last week, but it's kind of clear what made that run and what made that work. They had incredible goaltending. They had incredible goaltending, 62 games of Ilya Sorokin and then Semyon Varlamov filling in the rest. But I look at the numbers here according to Natural Stat Trick, right? The Islanders were 20th in shot attempt percentage. So just percentage of shot attempts going from 20th in the NHL. They were 20th in expected goals percentage. So based on shot quality essentially and shot volume, 20th in the NHL, which is below what should be a playoff team. As far as actual percentage of goals for, like goal share, 6th in the NHL. So that's a pretty big discrepancy there. And it can be explained because they were 15th in shooting percentage, which was okay. That's, league average, but they were 3rd in save percentage. And so you combine those two numbers, which are often used as kind of a proxy for luck for coaches. I think, as Jeff Merrick likes to say, right, show me a good goalie, I'll show you a good coach. A lot of coaching can be based on goaltending and the luck you get with your goaltending. And Lane Lambert, through his time with the Islanders, had incredible goaltending pretty much from start to finish. And so that Islanders team, the underlying numbers say they might be a little shaky defensively. They're probably not that good of a team, but they're getting incredible goaltending, and that is elevating them to being a wild card team. And so I think that's the takeaway you can have from that first season. And then I did I cut off the time and just the time that Lambert was coach in the next year in 23-24. And that Islanders team did fall quite a bit. They were 26th in shot attempt percentage in the league, 24th in expected goals percentage. So definitely a drop off there from 20th. And then in actual goals for percentage, they were also 20th. So that kind of caught up with them. Basically what the underlying numbers said they were the last season, they kind of actually were the next season. They dropped to 23rd in shooting percentage. So that dropped off as well. They were still 5th in save percentage though. They were still getting the goaltending. The problem was the goaltending went from being otherworldly league best to just above average. And that was enough combined with the shooting percentage dropping off a little bit where they didn't have the results at that point. They still had, you combine shooting percentage and save percentage for a stat called PDO, which we have mentioned before, and it's often used as a proxy for luck, and that should generally be about, middle of the league over a long sample size. They had the second highest in Lambert's full season and the 8th highest actually before he got fired. They still had the 8th highest in the league. So you were getting a lot of those bounces. And then I think, you're looking at that in your Lou Lamoriello. And if you are eager to make a coaching change, it seemed like he was. It seemed like he really wanted to get Patrick Waugh in there. And that's a Lamoriello thing. That's not a Lane Lambert thing. Maybe you look at those underlying numbers and you make a coaching change. I also saw this tweet at the time from Jay Fresh, who does hockey analytics. And so he said, someone with access to proprietary data told me they have the Islanders as the worst defensive team in the NHL. Yes, worse than the Sharks, but with the best goaltending in the league. Lane Lambert should be very grateful to his goalies. So that's the results from his Islanders tenure and maybe why the underlying numbers don't look quite as good as the record. That said, I think there's something that the numbers might not capture and we can talk about this when we get into systems, that might make it just more goalie friendly. The good goaltending might not be entirely on luck. That could just be on a system that makes it easier, gives goalies the opportunity to stop more shots and more that they can deal with.
Yeah. A lot of numbers there. No, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry if that was 2 numbers heavy, everybody. Maybe Dylan could help me kind of summarize all that.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things because I also don't want this to frame as we're going down this track of expect things not to improve basically with the Kraken with him, right? Because these numbers are that doesn't paint a great picture. The analytics not kind of really being there for this squad. When he was a coach there, and I guess I'll kitchen sink this moment when we talk about the struggles with the Islanders, and then what we think went wrong and hopefully how it won't go wrong with the Kraken. With the fact that, like, at the end of the day, the reason he was let go from the Islanders was, yes, because Lou wanted to bring in Patrick Waugh, but it was because the Islanders were extremely inconsistent. Now, obviously, if you have analytics that kind of speak to what they speak with there, where you have this good PDO, but all the underlying numbers are bad, it's not surprising to me that then day to day your team would look pretty inconsistent, because there's going to be the nights where the luck is in your favor and you're winning and it seems like everything is fine, and then you're going to have the games where you're actually playing the way that you are and the luck isn't there that night, and you're going to get the L. They had he was fired coming off of a 4-game losing streak, which wasn't a lot, but only 2 wins in their previous 10 games. And you're talking about 45 games into the season. So that's a pretty big downward trend for a team to have. They were 2 points out of the playoff spot. And Lou Lamoriello was just like, look, we need to get this team just more consistent and kind of level things off here. But, he wanted to kind of get ahead of, a total downward spiral, I guess is what we'd say. And look, that's what the numbers kind of point to. That said, I know saying the words inconsistency, underlying numbers, all of this kind of stuff, it's just going to be giving Kraken fans flashbacks to each of the last 2 seasons and each of the last 2 coaches, because that's essentially all this franchise has ever had, RJ, is inconsistency and poor underlying numbers that rear their ugly heads. Why do we think, though, that, like, maybe this could be a little bit different? Is it hopeless? Is this just the Kraken kind of doing the same thing again, right? Like, they're running it back with another coach that, if things start to take a turn, can't stop it from taking a turn, and that isn't going to kind of change things, under the hood when it comes to the analytics, because so much of what this franchise kind of needs is for those underlying numbers to be better, right? Like, we talk about, they need more goal scoring, they need better defense, they need all of this stuff. The bottom line is the Seattle Kraken have just never really been a consistent possession driving team, right?
No,
Like
they
that is
haven't.
something they need to figure out. Do we think that Lane Lambert can do that, right? Like, again, learning lessons under maybe a different head coach in the 1 year spent in Toronto, and then coming here with the experience of the Islanders, kind of under his belt. Is there something to look forward to there?
Yeah, and I think there is definitely hope. As much as the Islanders' tenure by itself can paint a potentially negative picture, I think, look, this is an entirely different team and an entirely different roster. Like, he's not coaching, the Islanders, and also you look at what they've done since. Like, they went down to an 82 point, they finished out the season with another first round loss under Patrick Waugh, but then they're an 82 point team this past year. Like, I think the problem with the Islanders, and I think everybody's come around to this, is a problem of composition and not coaching. Now, I think the Kraken have similar composition problems. I've said this before, right? The problem is composition, not coaching. And I think Lambert by himself, no, he can't fix these problems, but no coach can. I think it's going to take the GM to change the roster in ways that are going to make it better and give the coach more to work with. And that is Jason Botterill's entire goal this offseason. And so until we see what's done there, I mean, yeah, if the roster is exactly the same as it was last year, maybe I'm a little more pessimistic, but we know almost certainly that it won't be. And so really, it's on the GM way more than it's on the coach, I think, at this point. And so I think Lambert has the foundation that he can get the most out of a team that's underskilled. We talked about that last week. And you see that in his first year, in his only full year with the Islanders. He got a playoff appearance out of that Islanders team that, looking back at it, there's not a whole lot of high-end talent there. And you could make a real argument that this Kraken team is more talented than that Islanders team, and certainly has more potential out of the younger players. And so if he's able to get the most out of those guys, why can't they, sneak into the playoffs? So I definitely don't think it's all negative here. And I didn't mean the Islanders tenure to kind of to paint that picture about the Kraken, but I just think he's going to need some help roster wise, and it's on Botterill to go provide it.
Yeah, that was the big thing that I was working towards, was being above NHL 500, having the points percentage that he had with this Islanders team. Pretty impressive, actually. And I know, like, Barry Trotz was able to get a lot out of them previously, and he was kind of taking over for that, and so there was some bleed through there. But like, these Islanders squads were just terrible, right? Like, you look at the year that they had the 93 point season, and you Brock Nelson's kind of leading the way. You're getting, good production out of Matthew Barzal, but like after that, you're talking about real drop-offs from the forward group. And basically outside of Noah Dobson, a 23-year-old Noah Dobson, a non-existent blue line. And I think for, so much of what we talk about, whether it's from the analytics side of things or the defense was really a problem and they needed to shore up their defensive game. And that's partly why they brought in Patrick Waugh, and really what his main objective was coming in that they talked about was shoring up things defensively. But I look at the blue line that Lane Lambert had, RJ, and I think you would say that the Kraken roster as a whole is better than these Islanders rosters. The blue line is night and day as far as the pieces that he'll have here in Seattle versus what he had to work with the Islanders. And when you're talking about being able to help drive possession, having puck movers like Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, Riker Evans, he had Noah Dobson. Didn't have a whole lot. I mean, get Ryan Pollock is like the next best puck moving defenseman on that blue line, basically, right? Like he just had nothing to work with on the back end. And then on top of it, not only were they not guys that could maybe help, drive offense or get the puck up the ice, they're not exactly like defensive stalwarts either, right? Like there's nobody's going to be in that conversation on the blue line that he was really working with the Islanders either. And so I think the big thing that could lead to a huge difference in what he was able to do with the Islanders squads versus what he can do here in Seattle is just the fact that he'll have defensemen that he can kind of work with, and that can be multifaceted because they just weren't in with the Islanders.
Right. Give me Dunn, Larson, Evans, Montour, Alexiak over Pelech, Pollock, Mayfield, a 22-year-old Dobson, a 22-year-old Alexander Romanov. Like I think the blue line is stronger than what he was working with on the island. That seems pretty clear to me. Also, you did mention Barry Trotz and what he was able to get out of that team, but the season before Lambert took over, I mean, the Trotz-led Islanders were an 84-point team.
Mm-hmm.
9 points worse than what Lambert was able to do. And it wasn't just a difference in getting the goaltending. I mean, that Trotz Islanders team, third best save percentage in the NHL. So they were still getting the same level of goaltending. It just, he wasn't able to get the same results that Lambert got the next year. So you could make arguments on the Islanders tenure that he did squeeze the most out of that Islanders team that still had a whole lot of problems.
Right. And realistically, that's kind of what the Kraken need right now. Right. And we talked about this last week. Like, if you want the Kraken to be competitive sooner rather than later, you don't necessarily want to wait through a couple more years of let all the young kids develop. Let's, take this nice and slow and see what we can do through a full rebuild. This is the guy, because what he was able to do with the Islanders is actually pretty impressive. And like, that's the thing. Like, I look at that overall points percentage and I'm like, I get it. That is an attractive thing to look at if you're the Seattle Kraken and you're coming off the last two seasons that you're coming off of. If you can see somebody who worked with these pieces and got those results, you're like, yeah, let's see what he can do with our guys, because we do think we have better pieces. I've got to imagine that the front office is feeling that way. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see what things end up looking like there. But with that, I think we can move into what we think things will look like there. And so looking at systems that Lane Lambert ran with the Islanders, is it going to totally tell us what he's going to run with the Kraken? Maybe not. But it should give us kind of an idea of the style of game that he wants, because looking at these systems, not too dissimilar from what we saw at a Barry Trotz for like 2 decades, right? So it's very much in fitting with the coaching tree that he's from. Now I'm going to show some graphics here on the video version. We'll do our best to kind of talk through things for people who are just listening on the audio. But I do want to shout out DJ Singletone on Discord for sending me these. They're from Jack Hahn's 2023 tactics book, and huge shout out to DJ Singletone for being able to send these over so that we could get an idea of what things looked like X's and O's wise for the New York Islanders under Lane Lambert. And we're going to start in the offensive zone, where he kind of went with like a 2-1-2 approach in the offensive zone when attacking off of forechecks, right? It's a lot of utilizing, kind of splitting the ice down the middle and utilizing one side or the other. You always want somebody parked net front. I mean, just about every offensive system is going to have that. But then it really becomes about like where do we want to take shots from, right? Like, where are we trying to get pucks and people to? And under this system, under Lane Lambert there, you wanted to get pucks kind of to the, the side of the slot, right? Like, it's a pseudo high danger scoring area when you're talking about like the inside of the face off circle. But you're approaching the slot, and it really kind of was try to find that weak point between the other team's forward group and the other team's defensive group, right? And try to find that spot kind of halfway down in the offensive zone, and then try to take shots from there and really heavily rely on the screen of the goaltender net front. Now, that's all fine and good as long as you're getting that screen, right? Like, if you're getting that screen and you have the forwards who can put in the work to fetch the puck out of the corner, RJ, who can maneuver and get the timing right to, be there for the passes and all of that kind of stuff coming off of your cycle, everything works. Everything's fine with that. I'm curious to see if he's able to really fully bring this to the Kraken, because under two previous coaches, the Kraken have struggled when it comes to establishing a net front presence consistently in the offensive zone. And if Lane Lambert's going to kind of run things back with this 2-1-2, you need to have that screen there.
Yeah, and I look at the Kraken forward group as it's currently constructed, and it is just not a good fit for this. But again, there's time to make changes. You can bring players who will do that. But I look at Kraken forwards who are capable of being, I mean, look, this graphic that we have on the video version talks about Anders Lee. 6'3", 235-pound frame, very strong. And as it says here, he is an elite net front player. He absolutely is, because he's just built for that style of game. As far as Kraken players, I mean, you've got Jaden Schwartz, he certainly doesn't have that kind of frame, but he will do that job. And then maybe a Capo Caco. Beyond that, I don't really know who else you have. And so maybe that is a job for Jason Botterill, is to go and get at least one more of those guys in the offseason.
Yeah, and the problem with them is that they play on the same line. So you don't even have them. You don't even have
they
them
don't
like
have to,
spread
but
out. Yeah. And really, Jaden Schwartz, we think of Jaden Schwartz as a net front guy, but really he's more of a net side guy, right? Because he doesn't have the size and the strength to be able to all the time be directly in front of the goaltender's eyes, right? And taking away that vision. But when we talk about ways of the Kraken offense improving, obviously it would be great if they found a star player, a consistent 30 goal scorer, all of those things, right? We've been talking about forever. But the other way that teams can have success, and this is really what the Islanders did under Lane Lambert, is something I've talked about in the past: manufacture chances, manufacture goals. And this is how you manufacture goals, right? It's about having a good solid forecheck. It's about having a strong cycle game. It's about taking away goalies' vision, especially on a team like the Kraken, where you're going to load up on offensive talent at the blue line. You want to take shots from the blue line with guys like Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, Riker Evans, Jamie Alexiak's no slouch there either. Basically everybody but Adam Larson. You need a net front presence. You need guys to take away the goalie's sight lines. And we see it seemed like every time the Kraken actually did it last year, they got a goal, but for whatever reason, that didn't teach them to do it all the time. But I do think that if they have a coach that's able to get them there more consistently, really explain that, yes, the wear and tear and those net front battles do pay off, I think things can go well for them. And hopefully Lane Lambert's the guy to kind of do that for them, because I think this is their path forward offensively if they can't go out and sign Mitch Marner or whatever, right? Like, Berkeley Catton's not ready to come in and be a creative force in the offensive zone right away. You need to find ways of manufacturing these chances for yourself. When we look at the offensive forecheck for Lane Lambert, pretty traditional, although I would argue that, like, certainly based off of this graphic, RJ, kind of an aggressive 1-2-2 offensive zone forecheck. Obviously, in a 1-2-2, you're going to have one primary pressure of the puck, one person whose job is to just go and absolutely be on that puck carrier and try to get them to make a mistake or force a pass or something like that. And really, in this system, in this version of it under Lane Lambert with the Islanders, it was force them to just have to kind of rim it around the boards and out of the zone. And so then you have your next layer of defense, the two other forwards that you have out there. Their job was to get to the boards and take away the wall, right? Like, don't give them the out of being able to just, cycle the puck out of the zone that way, right? If you've got a puck carrier who's being pressured behind their own zone, you don't want them just to rim it around. You want somebody there to take it away. And then even in this system, the D pretty aggressive as far as pinching higher up on the walls as well. So this is one where all day long, I think the Kraken can do this, RJ, because you have players like Matty Beniers. You've got Shane Wright who can do this. Chandler Stevenson, I think, should be able to do this just because of the speed and the skating that he has. I think if you're able to instill this, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of skating on your center or your F1. Usually it's your center in this case. But if you're able to get that aggressive, pressure on the puck carrier, and then you have the other guys following through, especially if you're going to try to dictate things to be like out towards the walls where you can try to win a board battle. I like that in theory. Again, where I have concerns with this Kraken squad is great. I believe that they can pressure the puck carrier, and I believe that they can get them to send it along to the walls. I don't know that they can then win the board battles that will ensue along those walls, right? I think of like a Florida Panthers squad. Like this is how the whole system works for them, right? Offensively and defensively, it all comes down to winning board battles along the wall. I don't know that the Kraken could win those board battles the way that this is kind of set up.
And I think back to a couple of years ago with Dave Haxtell in his final season too, and that was an area of emphasis against a lot of different opponents, was winning those battles along the walls. And the Kraken did struggle with that with their forward group. And so I think the key to this system is winning those battles against along the walls. And also one thing, I don't even say I worry about it, but it's going to be very important, I think, is the D timing their pinching correctly. We've seen them do it well for long stretches with the Kraken, and it seems like it really can just shift the game in the Kraken's favor against any opponent too, if the D time their pinches well. If not, this actually it does look like a pretty aggressive system, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be made to pay for that if you miss on a pinch with the D, because the forwards have to skate hard, really hard back. And also you are leaving a lot of the middle of the ice open for a breakout. You're trying to, force the puck along the walls, but if they can get somebody open in the middle and you have a D going up, that gives the forwards the opportunity with numbers to potentially split the D, create an odd man rush the other way. So it actually does seem kind of high risk, high reward, which I don't usually think of for a defensively minded coach like Lane Lambert, but that's just what it looks like to me.
I think this is what you have to run though if you don't have the horses up front, right? Like these are the decisions that you have to make if you don't have a super talented roster up front. And certainly looking at these Islander squads.
Yeah, you have to take risks to generate things like this systematically because you don't have the skill up front that's going to just generate things for you by itself.
Yeah, I mean, certainly like the Kraken need to learn how to manufacture chances. This Islander squad need to learn how to force chances, right? Like you had to force these opportunities for yourself if you're out there. And so I think that's partly why it runs this way. But as we then move into, well, I'm going to skip entry delay. We can get back to that. But just talking about what we just talked about and then looking at the neutral zone forecheck, this is where I kind of look at things and I go, how is this supposed to work? Like this is the one aspect of the X's and O's that I'm really like, I don't totally understand what the plan here is. So if you have that very kind of aggressive offensive zone forecheck where you have your puck carrier, your pressure of the puck carrier F1 is being really aggressive against them, particularly if it's going to be down low in the zone. You have your other forwards, really plastered against the walls. Your D is maybe even pinching up. How are you then supposed to get back and run like a proper 1-1-3 or a 1-1-2 if things are delayed, right? Like if the other team starts moving up the ice, you're just never going to be in position to run something as controlled as a 1-1-3. You're never going to have three players back. You know what I mean? And this is where I can see there being, again, inconsistency troubles with the New York Islanders is if you're being really aggressive and you're committing serious assets where you're committing your center, a winger along the half boards, and then also a pinching up D, that only leaves you two pieces who conceivably are then conservative in the offensive zone if things start going the other way. I don't know then why you would stick to a 1-1-3 where you have like one guy up front kind of pressuring and then one guy in the middle again loosely pressuring, and really you're just defending your own blue line with three pieces and trying to keep the other team from being able to enter with speed. I don't know again how these two things, RJ, are supposed to work together realistically unless you have an unbelievably fast team and guys who are just capable of skating miles and miles every night.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is you need somebody who's fast enough to get back because the aggressive system puts them kind of behind the eight ball if the puck goes the other way. But you, at the same time, need that player to be big enough to consistently win those board battles when you do successfully force the puck up the boards. And there are very few players who I think check both of those boxes consistently. And so I'm not really sure. I'm with you. I'm not really sure how exactly that's supposed to run. It also seems like it really relies on that, especially F3 I'm seeing in the diagram here,
Mhm.
his decision-making ability, whoever that is, to know if it's not going our way, okay, the puck's going back there, I need to book it back there so I can
Mhm.
be the 3 in the 1-1-3 and help out the 2D. And if you don't do that and make that split second decision right away, you're in danger.
Yeah. So this is where I'm a little, and I'm fine with the 1-1-3 neutral zone thing. Like this part of the equation is fine for me. It's going back to that offensive zone forecheck is where I'm like, I just don't know that this is going to be a good, like that would be a good fit for the Kraken. And again, we don't know that this is what Lane Lambert's going to run with the Seattle Kraken. This is just what we have experienced with him running. But I'm okay with something like this with the neutral zone forecheck with the 1-1-3 or a 1-2-2 based on somebody's decision making like that, because you have wingers like a Capo Caco, Jared McCann, who do have good defensive chops and can make those decisions, or at least I would trust their decision making and I would trust their ability to put themselves in the right spot to help defend a rush going back the other way if it's kind of controlled. I don't know that, again, if you're going to be super aggressive in the offensive zone with this Kraken squad, that you're going to then have a lot of, defensive control if things don't work out and it gets moving against you with some speed.
And with the Islanders too, if we go back and look at these two things together with that Islanders roster, it kind of makes sense to me why we saw the results we did, where when it's working well, then you
Yeah.
have a team that can get, quote unquote, very lucky and play better than the skill that they have. But when it's not working well, yeah, this makes sense why you give up a ton of chances and why by the time Lambert was fired, they were the worst team statistically defensively in the NHL.
Right.
That just makes sense, and why there might be that inconsistency there with the players the Islanders had running this system.
Yeah, because if you're winning those offensive board battles and you're then like really pressuring the other team, you're going to manufacture some goals there, and it's going to be frustrating for them to get the puck up the ice. But the moment they're able to break it out and they're just coming at you with odd man rushes, and so again, you can survive that, right? The Panthers have survived that this postseason, kind of being super aggressive, because you have goaltending who steps up and makes that big save for you, right? And obviously, Ilya Sorokin was capable of making a big save a lot. Joey Daccord is capable of
I was
making
going to
big
say,
saves.
man,
But as we saw last season with Joey Daccord, you can make big saves, but if it's just happening too often, there's nothing any goaltender can do about it. And so
there's a limit.
yes. So this is actually the thing that concerns me the most is just, what kind of forecheck in the offensive zone do they have? And then what's their neutral zone forecheck? And is there going to be something that kind of shows more cohesion between the two than what we saw under Lane Lambert in with the Islanders there in New York? When it comes to like offensive zone rushes and stuff, you're kind of looking to get like two guys moving up the ice together at the same time, trying to enter the zone at the same time. The puck carrier then has the job of testing the defense to see if he can move towards the middle of the ice. Because generally you're not entering the zone through the middle of the ice, right? You're closer to along the boards. If the defense is going to let him take the middle, he takes the middle, and you get a good shot from a good opportunity. 95 out of 100 times the defense is not going to let you take the middle of the NHL if they have anything to say about it. And so then we see like a pretty standard, button hook, make your read. You do again have aggressive defensemen in the offensive zone as far as when the puck carrier decides to make that button hook and come back, your cycle is already set up with like your D2, your far side D, your weak side D, moving up and trying to get into a scoring chance. So I kind of like that with the Seattle Kraken squad, because if that's, Brandon Montour, he's going to be fast enough to get back. You're going to be able to survive that. Vince Dunn's going to be fast enough to get back. You can survive that. So I kind of am okay with that from an aggressiveness standpoint. Otherwise, this is, what we run into with like every NHL team, right? Cycling, once you have to cycle, once you have to button hook and cycle, it all just comes down to, do you have guys that have good vision? Can they make good plays? Kraken at times have had that, at times they haven't. I think it's still something they need to get better about is that split second decision making reads in the offensive zone. I don't know that it's always been totally laid out for them very cleanly, based on previous systems. But if in this instance, if you're going to have more of a net front presence, I don't hate kind of what the Kraken have always done and what this diagram is showing, which is send it back to the point, right? Like
Yeah.
cycle using your defenseman. I'm fine with that as long as you have somebody taking away a goalie's vision.
Yeah, and this seems to fit, I think, really well with the Kraken's personnel you mentioned with Montour and Dunn. But I can absolutely see this, a button hook by, Burakovsky or any forward, right? Drops it back to Montour for the one timer, and he can absolutely just rip those. And let's say it's, Montour Evans as a D pair, like they went with kind of toward the end of the season. You have Evans sneaking in backside, and he has the talent to be able to do something with it if a puck goes over to him. I mean, same thing if you just flip the sides, right? One timer Evans, Montour sneaking down backdoor. You love that. Same thing with Dunn and Larson, where Larson can give you a hard, heavy, low one timer, and Vince Dunn sneaking back door. That's dangerous. And then vice versa. Adam Larson loves to sneak in back door off of a shot there. He likes to do that, especially a lot last season. So I like it with the D that they have, especially in the top four. Like that seems to be a good fit.
Yeah, no, I think the D aspect of this makes it work. Again, so much will just come down to whether or not they can get that consistent net front presence and they can take away a goalie's sight lines. I think that's at the end of the day what's going to be relied upon. And then just to finish out things offensively, power play systems, guess what? It runs a 1-3-1. Shocking.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, everybody does. Pretty basic setup too, as far as like, whether it's on the left or the right flank and where guys are kind of going and the decision making there. I'm not going to spend too much time breaking it down. You can, pause the video if you're watching on the video version. It's more or less what everybody tries to do.
Yeah, and every power play is going to be so specifically tailored to the players that you have that it's entirely different personnel, so it's going to look entirely different. And we'll find a lot more about that during training camp.
Exactly, right? Like Yanni Newman's going to be around. You got to think they're going to be drawing up stuff to get, his one-timer involved, things like that. So looking at the defensive zone, because, this is really like the thing, right? With Lane Lambert is the defensive stuff. And we know that it was at times iffy under the Islanders. They have this where they're calling it a protect the middle / early box out. It's all about angles, right? And this is what you were hinting at earlier when you talked about like goalie save percentage and maybe having some of that stuff. It's you're trying to protect the middle of the ice. You're trying to take away at the end of the day the high danger chances, right? That's what you're defending against. You're trying to force the other team out to the perimeter. You're trying to see what you can do there. You're running zone defense down low in the zone, man to man. If the puck gets moved up to the point, that's pretty standard. That's what like everybody in the NHL basically runs these days. And that's basically all this is. Like, I don't understand, other than the personnel wasn't there, why everybody was really complaining about this defense. When you go back and you read about his time with the Islanders and the defensive issues, it feels like everything then should have fallen more so on personnel rather than the coaching, because this is ideally what you'd want to do. If you have a goaltender that you can trust, like a Sorokin or like a Joey Decord, let them gobble up shots from afar. Like, that's fine. They'll make those saves.
Yeah, and you look at some of the stats too, and we've seen this with the Kraken as well, where some of them, it feels like can be volume weighted a little bit too, where if you do allow a lot of low quality, low danger chances, how that's going to look statistically is your expected goals. It's going to show a lot of expected goals against, because those chances add up, and it's going to show, a lot of chances like that against. And then the goaltending numbers are going to look better than they, should really, if you accounted for quality in a proper way that encapsulated everything, which you can't really do. And that's kind of the numbers we saw with the Islanders. I mean, I do still have the concern is that toward the end of Lambert's tenure, they were also near the bottom of the league in high danger chances allowed, which that's the sort of thing that should not be happening.
I was just going to explain why I think that did happen, but yeah.
Okay, well, go. I would imagine maybe I'll let you explain, but like maybe it was more rush based, like the stuff we were talking about earlier.
I think there's the rush aspect of it for sure, and I think that was a problem for them. I'm also guessing because like this is all great in theory, right? You're protecting the middle of the ice. You don't give them the slot, so they have to take shots from the perimeter, right? Whether it's a winger closer to the half boards or it's shots from the point. Those are easy saves for the goaltender. What happens after a goalie makes a save, though, RJ, unless it goes right into their glove?
Rebound.
Is a rebound. And I think that that's what got them. That's what was getting the Kraken a lot last year, was they had guys behind them. They struggled with that zone down low. And I would imagine a lot of those same problems were happening here in New York, because again, I talked about it earlier. This is not like an all-star caliber blue line, right? Like again, you have probably significantly better pieces here with the Kraken, and the Kraken just struggled doing this. This is what Dan was trying to do essentially, right? Like they were trying to forced turnovers. They were a little bit more aggressive with it under Dan Bylsma last year, the Kraken, because it was more so, if the puck's down low in the corner, let's really pressure that puck carrier. Let's try to steal the puck and then get moving up the ice. This is a little bit more, let's just try to force them to have to move the puck back towards the blue line. So it's a little bit more conservative in that regard, and that might very well make a big difference with this Kraken squad. Certainly for like a Jamie Alexiak. Jamie Alexiak struggled mightily, right? Being that number one primary pressurer of the puck carrier, trying to force those turnovers, then get the puck up the ice. Riker Evans really struggled being the weak side D in those and covering the net front. If you kind of have more so two defensemen net front, because you're just trying to force things up and to the higher part of the zone, I feel like things could work a lot better for the Kraken. But yeah, if you don't have the bodies to play physical net front and handle guys coming in for rebounds, you're giving up a lot of dangerous opportunities where your goalie has just made a save. He might not be in position. He hasn't recovered from that, and you're getting out muscled net front, and that could be an issue.
Well, I do want to challenge you a little bit on that one, though, Dylan, because if I'm looking at the Islanders D from that time, look, I don't love that blue line, but it does look to me like they do have the bodies at least to do that. Adam Pelech, 6'3", 210,
Yeah.
Ryan Pulock, 6'2", 220. Those guys, like I would take those guys over maybe a Dunn and Montour in just the net front, push a guy out of the way, win the physical battle type situation. Even a young Noah Dobson, still 6'4" and a solid guy. So that's one where I do wonder, okay, did they have the personnel? Because it looks, Scott Mayfield, 6'5", 213. It looks like that blue line is built to do that sort of thing.
Jeremy Lauzon was 6'3", 225, and we have not once seen him be able to do that. Right? Again,
Jamie Alexiak.
Jamie Alexiak is bigger than all of them, and he doesn't do that. And so it's one where, like, again, I don't have like a total metric that can prove that that's what was happening, but I get it, right? Like, yes, the blue line has size, just like the Kraken blue line has had size. We've never once described the Kraken blue line as being physical or controlling the game physically or being able to box guys out net front, right? Like Adam Larsson is essentially the one guy on this blue line that's ever done that. And I think largely the blue line's actually kind of size-wise even out, right? Because like it's similar to the Islanders. So again, it's one where I think you can have the body to do it, but if you don't have the ability to read and react to it, or to know your positioning, or to know when my partner goes and pinches here, like this was Riker Evans' issue last year, this was Jamie Alexiak's issue last year. When my partner is going to be that aggressive guy on the puck, where am I supposed to be? Right. And so that's I think the stuff that you can really end up struggling with. And it doesn't matter how big you are. If you're just not in the right spot, you're not in the right spot.
Yeah, I think you are correct on that point. I'm not trying to do this whole argument with you, but I will say those are the same guys that Trotz did make it work with. 3 of the top 4 D are the same.
They are. No, I know. Obviously, something did not work. Like I said, everybody talked about the defense. Again, in theory, this defense works. We saw it last year not work in practice with the Kraken. It didn't work in practice with the Islanders either. Like I will not, cannot deny that it did not work.
But I still do wonder how much of it came down to the rush stuff that we mentioned earlier versus this.
I think a lot of it was the rush stuff.
That would make a lot of sense to me, and one where I think the Kraken could be better.
Exactly. And then the last thing to talk about is just the penalty kill. Shocking. It's kind of a variation off of the wedge +1 that everybody in the world but Mark Giordano has seen, apparently.
Yep. Revolutionary stuff.
Yeah. Although this one feels a little bit aggressive to me, like just kind of looking at it, the diagram, and then also like reading the kind of write-up on it. It does feel slightly, maybe a little bit more aggressive, particularly with, your strong side D, right? Like the fact that your D1 is supposed to like kind of step out and into the shooting lane. Like, again, this is basically what the Kraken ran last year. We saw how often that led to Adam Larsson particularly being the guy to step up into that shooting lane. And then if he doesn't get the shot block, you just now have a defenseman who's about 5 to 10 feet too far away to do anything, right? Certainly when
On
it
an
comes to
island
a
against 2 or 3 guys.
yeah, certainly when it comes to a rebound, you're just, already on the power play, they're going to have one dedicated person net front you're not touching. And then all of a sudden you can easily get overwhelmed net front. So I would maybe like to see a more conservative approach to whatever PK approach that the team is going to take, just because, again, this seems very similar defensively to what the Kraken were trying to do last year. And in practice, it just did not work.
Yeah, and especially from the D1 here on this diagram, I might like to see a little more of a conservative approach here. But I think the key to all of this is like what you're talking about, where on a pass from up top with the point to the player on the half wall, F1, it says traps down to prevent a pass back. So basically, you're trying to isolate that player who's on the wall and
Yeah,
on one side
into a
and
low
keep the
quality
play.
shot.
Exactly. Keep that play all to one side, trap him into a low quality shot, which maybe you could even do a little more effectively if the D1 isn't so aggressive and trying to take out the shooting lane. From there, give him the shooting lane as long as they can't
Exactly.
move the puck.
Exactly. No, like that's what I'm talking about. Like it makes no sense. You did a better job of talking about it. It's crazy to me when they decide to have one of your two defensemen go and be like a pressurer of the puck carrier. It's a 1-3-1 and your guy's stuck on the half boards. Who cares? Like if they score from there, you've got way bigger problems, right? Like that's like you need to maybe have a goalie in net is what that means. So it's one of those, like I do not like, if you're running a wedge, a +1, triangle +1, whatever you want to call it. I do not like being aggressive with your defenseman ever. It just doesn't make sense to me because you're already being aggressive with one of your 4 penalty killers. You're already opening up things where during rebound chances, the other team could match you man for man or even have a man advantage there. It makes no sense for me to commit a forward as a puck carrier up high, as a puck pressurer up high, and then also move a defenseman out as well to try to, do something. It makes no sense to me. So that would be something that I would want to see, especially after watching it just play out poorly for the Kraken time after time last year. I want to see a more conservative approach to the penalty kill than what Lane Lambert last ran.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things where you could look at that, especially I'm sure Lane Lambert's going to watch a whole lot of tape from the Kraken last year. And you look at that and think, okay, maybe with this personnel, we should make this adjustment here because they don't seem to be able to handle this style of being aggressive.
Yeah. And then like kind of last thing, like just to round out the systems talk here, RJ, real quick with Lane Lambert, because obviously through a lot of that, I'm talking about this is what the Kraken did last year and it didn't work. Right. So obviously there should be some of what you just talked about, of like looking at that, seeing the tape and being like, okay, maybe we change some things up. Here's part of the problem. Just like with power plays where everybody runs some variation of the 1-3-1, more or less everybody runs these things now, right? Like so much of the NHL from a system standpoint. And again, there's variations and how you go about doing things in there, how conservative or aggressive you are with all of them. But more or less there's 2 forechecks you run. There's maybe like 2 neutral zone forechecks any teams run these days. There's 1 power play. There's more or less 1 penalty kill. Like everybody's to some extent running a wedge +1. Like everything is just what it is, right? Like you have to be able to attack off the cycle, right? But your offensive zone forecheck should very, for the most part, end up, they all look the same throughout the league. How much do we then, like, does it actually even come down to coaching? If all the systems around the NHL right now, RJ, are as similar as they've ever been, where everybody is running just the same systems, how much does it even then matter when we break this stuff down for coaches?
Not as much as you might think. That's my answer anyway. And I have as my final question on my notes here, how much does it actually matter? And I think we were kind of on the same page there, where given that, and especially with this group, where last year, and I think this is where I really, I don't want to say it like radicalized me here, but this is where I really had a realization, I think, is when in morning skates for games, we would hear from Dan Bilesma, okay, against this team, that our opponent that we're playing tonight, we need to do X. This is how we shut them down. This is the opponent specific game plan. We need to do this. And so we'd see that, we'd write it down. And then the players would come out right after that and be like, hey, what do you need to do to shut down this opponent? And they would say the exact same thing that Dan Bilesma said. So they're on the same page.
Mhm.
And you know what? Previously at Morning Skate, we saw them working on that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we just saw them out on the ice
Yeah.
doing. And they were executing it. Often sometimes without, players on the other side pressuring them, but they were executing exactly what they needed to do. They were telling us what they needed to do. They were on the same page. They heard it, they internalized it, they repeated it to us. And then that night they'd go out in the game and they wouldn't do it. And they would not execute. It was like, especially the game was against Edmonton or whatever, where Bilesman said we need to make crisp passes out of our own zone. That's the key, because that's
Mhm.
going to limit them, being able to capitalize off turnover, all that stuff. Players told us crisp passes out of our own zone. That's what we got to do. And then it was the worst passing out of their own zone. It was the worst D zone passing maybe that I saw all season.
Yeah.
And so at that point, when you ask, okay, what is the role of coaching? I feel like, the coach has kind of done everything they can at that point. And so really it's on Lane Lambert. Part of his job really taking this over is to just find a way to go from telling the players where they hear it, they understand, they know, having them actually do it. It's that final step that I couldn't tell you how to do. Once you've
Yeah.
accomplished all the prior steps, I would say that's usually enough that it should get done consistently. But Lambert's got to figure out how to get him to actually do it consistently.
No, and I'm completely with you, right? Like, I do think that there's merit in, like, yes, everybody knows the basic systems that you're going to run in the NHL because everybody else is running them as well, right? The fact that everybody now basically does zone defense, lower in the zone, and then switches to man when it's up high. Like, just it's like 29 of 32 teams or something ran that last year. Like, okay, like it is ubiquitous. Everybody knows it. It's all the small variations, and I do think that that's where, like, the really good coaches, the really good strategy coaches anyway, can make a difference. Is that they understand those little differences and what they should do, and even what they should maybe change game to game or opponent to opponent. Right. I think that all of that stuff is good, and I think that we tend to think about that when it comes to coaches a lot, because in other sports that matters a lot, that kind of strategy and play by play and what system are we running, right? Like in football, that is everything, right? What is your offense? What are you guys doing? What is the strategy? How are you adjusting and counter adjusting to what the other team is doing? Because that is how you win in football, right? That's how that sport is just designed, is for that battle to be taking place between those two coaches, the two play callers, play by play. Hockey is just so not built that way, that I think that we tend to focus on that aspect of coaches when really so much of it just comes down to motivating them and being able to, yeah, communicate to them, and then being able to get them when their adrenaline is high, when they're tired, when they're sucking wind, they just finished a shift, being able to go to them and actually get through to them that they need to go out there this next time and do something slightly different. And that, I think, has been where the Kraken just haven't been successful with their previous head coaches. I really hope Lane Lambert's successful there. It's going to be really impossible for us to know if he can until the season gets underway and everything. But I do think that, like, at the end of the day, that's where the good hockey coaches separate themselves from the bad hockey coaches. It has nothing to do with X's and O's, because everybody's doing the same thing anyway. It's all about motivating and actually getting through to their players.
Yeah, and one more point I want to make on this as well is that the couple areas where coaches can have a more outsized impact, because it does turn into more X's and O's, of course, is special teams on the power play
Yes.
and the PK. And that's why I stand by this as much as I did a few months ago when I was saying it was very important coaching wise. The assistants, whatever assistant coaches are going to be brought in, especially to run special teams, are going to be very, very important, I think. And so that's one thing I'm going to keep an eye on. Hopefully we'll get more clarity on that later this week. But I imagine they probably won't make a final decision on assistants then. But keep an eye out, because I still think it is crucial for the Kraken to bring in an assistant coach who is a power play specialist, because that is one area that Lane Lambert's teams, or, especially if the Islanders, struggled. And part of that is not having the personnel, of course,
Yeah.
but still, like, the PK has always been more his specialty, and he's done a great job improving the PK. He did that for the Leafs last season. Great job.
Definitely.
And so
Yep.
I trust him to take on a more active role PK wise and make sure that that's good. For the power play, there's just nothing in his resume that shows that he can be a power play guru or anything like that. Nothing against him. It's just not his specialty. They need to bring in a power play specialist assistant coach, somebody who has a proven track record generating a good power play at the NHL level. And so that's the thing I really want to see assistant wise.
How I will ask you this though, to slightly push back on that. How much is power play really coaching again when everybody runs a 1-3-1 and it's just about small variations there versus just overall team composition? Because like I just sort the league by power play percentage, and guess what? It's the teams with all the star players are at the top, and the teams without them at the bottom.
I'm with you. It is mostly composition, and that is the power play is way more of an issue for Jason Botterill to fix than it is for any power play coach they bring in. That said, if you are going the route of trying to sneak into a playoff spot this year, which the Lambert hire tells me you are, you have very little margin for error given the talent deficiencies on this roster. And I think last year, again, if you're looking at it from the perspective of, say, Ron Francis was looking at a team last year and thinking, okay, maybe they're not a cup contender, but like this coaching staff is not getting the most out of the players we have here. The power play is a big part of that. And I think the power play underachieved. We talked about that all season. Mm-hmm. And if you can just make up a slight difference there and even get to league average, which I think the Kraken have the personnel to at least do that, that makes up a big portion of what you're trying to do by getting, I mean, look, all you're trying to do is get to the top half of the league. Mm-hmm. You'd be 15th or 16th in the league. It's a low bar to make the playoffs. If you can get your power play to league average, that's going to go a long way versus if it stays as bad as it was last year, you're going to have real problems.
Roughly 3% is what they need to improve power play percentage to get to league average. Like that's,
and I think that is like something that a good assistant can do. They're not going to have the top power play in the league, of course not. But I think a good assistant can get them up just that little amount to where they could maybe, especially again, if you're focusing on a defense first system like Lane Lambert likes to do, you have to take advantage of your counterattack opportunities, but also the power play. You're going to try and create a low scoring game. Joey's going to make a lot of saves for you, and you've got to strike when you have those power plays.
Yeah. Final thing, and this goes back to his time under Barry Trotz, because I was just thinking about this with Barry Trotz. When was Barry Trotz most successful? What do we think of with Barry Trotz hockey? And again, this kind of goes into like one of the things we want to talk about here at the end too, which is just like which players do we think will be, benefit the most from Lane Lambert coming in? When I do think of Barry Trotz, I do think of like activated defensemen and defensemen that are able to come in and really like become the difference maker, right? Like step up and help out maybe an underpowered forward group or make the difference for like a Washington Capitals group, right? Get more out of them than like in years previously. I do wonder if that's going to carry over under Lane Lambert, right? And like seeing that difference and why things then didn't always work out great for the Islanders under Barry Trotz or Lane Lambert, not having those offensive blue liners. I do wonder if, again, having Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, Riker Evans really is able to make the offense work in a way that without them, it just doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a coach coming into that situation, like you got to find a way to use those guys. They're going to be on the team and they have exceptional talents they can bring to you as far as activating and everything. If you don't find a good way to use them, I think you're probably in trouble. So I think that's going to be a big part of it for Lane Lambert, and not an option he had with the Islanders. Yes. There was no defenseman on that team that could really do that. Noah Dobson hadn't figured out his full game yet. There was just nobody.
I was just trying to think about that because, like, Barry Trotz, you think of, his time with the Predators, right? Shea Weber, and obviously you're talking about a Hall of Famer and Shea Weber, right? Like whatever, but like, you think of Shea Weber and different guys like Ryan Ellis further down the lineup, right? Like just every one of those pairings had a puck mover and the system knew what to do with them. Think of the Washington Capitals team and the success they were able to have the year that they won the cup. And you think of John Carlson being able to really step up with that offensive mindset and everything there. And then, just the crickets when you get to the Islanders to an extent.
Yeah, and even with the Islanders, I think Nick Leddy played a lot of that role.
He's
that I talked about when we were talking about the box out guys, right? That 3 of the 4 defensemen that Lambert had at his disposal were the same, as the top 4 with under Trotz. But the difference is Trotz had a Nick Leddy. Lambert didn't have him.
Yeah. No, it's true. And like with those Islanders, some of those years under Barry Trotz, like, you're looking at much better numbers out of Nick Leddy than in some other years too. So that'll be an interesting one. Who do you think benefits from Lane Lambert forward group wise?
I have a list of players here that I think will benefit. I mean, number one, possibly, I mean, if it all works out the way that it should, Joey Decord.
Yeah.
Because he was absolutely hung out to dry last year. I really think if you put him under the same system, basically put the skaters in front of him that those Islanders teams had, he's in the Vezina conversation. He's probably a Vezina finalist, given the way he played last year. So Joey Decord, I think, should benefit the most from this. Other names like Matty Beniers. I mean, you talk about, a forward who does have the legs and the defensive acumen to kind of get back and make that forecheck system work. I mean, Batty, he's it. Jamie Alexiak, we talked about, Adam Larson. I'll try and leave some names for you or to expand on the names I mentioned.
We're over on time, so it's fine if you want to just speed run it or whatever. Yeah. But Matty Beniers, absolutely. I think we're going to finally see Matty Beniers play the way that he's played for Team USA. And I think that that's where Matty Beniers arguably has had the most success. And obviously he had the success this year at the Worlds. We talked about that last week. But I think going back to World Juniors, Matty Beniers in his draft year, and why he, Ron Francis probably fell in love with him and made him the first, Kraken draft pick ever. His motor was just so intense. His forechecking was so intense. I mean, that Team USA team, if they were more aggressive with their offensive zone forecheck, could have scored so much more because of what Matty was able to do. They ran a very, very, very conservative forecheck, and he was just able to just constantly be on guys. Other teams could not move the puck up the ice. They were able to play like a 1-1-3 going back because Matty Beniers solo as that one guy up front just made it so that the other team had to regroup, and just could never break out of their own zone. So everybody was able to get back, get in position, and then you were able to really make it in through the neutral zone a total slog. And that was all what Matty Beniers was doing. He's still young enough. He should still have that energy to be able to go out there and do that. I don't know when it comes to board battle time that he's going to necessarily be able to get things done. But when it comes to just being a dog out there, he's going to be able to do that all day.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what Lane Lambert can unlock with him for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I think Capo Caco could also take like an interesting two-way step forward here. Maybe not have the offensive production, but if he's able to establish himself as a net front, like true net front guy, I think that things could be, he could play a significant role in the offense. But I also think that defensively, him and Jared McCann, like I talked about earlier, should be like in good roles to like play key minutes for this squad where they have to maybe defend a lead, something like that.
Yeah, I would think so. And then one other player I'm curious about too is Andre Burakovsky, because he doesn't fit that kind of just defensive system, but it is someone that Lane Lambert has coached before with the Washington Capitals. And I wonder, look, Burakovsky figured out his game really toward the end of last season. And I wonder if that momentum can be carried forward with Lane Lambert as a coach, someone who's familiar with him. And also we just talked about that whole system off the rush of doing the button hook, finding the defenseman. That sounds like Berkey's music.
Exactly. Like Berkey, you can trust his instincts when it comes to moving the puck. Like what we've seen in the times when he's been successful with the Kraken has been that it's been we're attacking off the rush, just make a decision, right? Just go with your gut. Like Berkey has good gut instincts. So much of what's gone wrong for him this past season was like him starting to overthink things. Or how many rushes did we see where he'd go enter the zone, button hook, and just nobody's there? Right. Like there was just a lot of instances like that. And you're taking away what he does best. He doesn't do the other stuff necessarily all that great, but he does do that really well. He can be that guy on the boards in a cycle who can then make the decision of, am I sending this back to the point, or is there a more aggressive play to be made? Like that is the thing that he is probably best at more than anything. So if they're able to put him in a spot like that, it should be better, especially if they're able to get two players moving up ice at once. Should benefit him probably more than anybody else, versus last year where it was a lot of solo rushes up the ice and then there's a line change and that person's just kind of stuck, trapped on an island all by themselves.
Yeah. And so it adds some fuel to me for that maybe he won't be bought out this offseason. I was already leaning that way anyway. I figured he probably wouldn't be, but I think this makes it even less likely that he would be bought out. On the flip side, I think it might even make it more likely that Philip Grubauer is bought out, just because if it could even get more likely, just because as we've seen from all of the system, everything, it requires elite all world goaltending to make work. And just there's nothing that Grubauer has shown you. He's shown you at times that maybe he can be serviceable, but not that he can be any high end goalie.
Yeah, exactly. All right, real quick, just to just because I don't want to like totally like dismiss it and everything, but we'll probably have more time to get into it next week, especially because we'll have protection lists and everything out there for the PWHL. But PWHL Seattle has named their first ever general manager, RJ. It is Megan Turner. Previously was working with the Boston Fleet, so already has experience in the PWHL in a front office capacity, working with players and kind of handling everything there. Has a very significant business background as well. So I think that this puts her in a really good spot to kind of meld those two. And when we did the media availability with her last Friday, she talked about that, just, having the understanding the business side of things and understanding how to communicate to that group of people, but then also having a college and professional playing background and knowing and how, having the ability to communicate on the hockey side of things. I think that should, in theory, right, like set up somebody to be a great general manager in this role.
Yeah, and I liked what I heard from her. She seems very sharp. I'm excited to see how she can attack this expansion draft, which seems to have very favorable rules for the expansion teams as well. So she's going to have a lot of good options to work with. And you could tell there was an extent to which she didn't really want to reveal her secrets, of course, like any GM.
Yeah.
But again, she just seemed very sharp to me. And as far as the style of the game for the team, I liked her quote on this. She said, well, I'm from Boston, so I'm partial to physicality. So expect a physical team there as well.
Well, she was very clear to say physicality does not necessarily always mean physical, right? Physicality and physical are two different things. Just meaning that once, like a strong team wants a team capable of, say, winning a board battle or doing something like that, or defending physically, but not like, oh, we're going to sell out for hits. We're going to turn things into a grind. We're going to do all of that kind of stuff. And so she did make that clarification, and I do want to get that in there. They want to coach fast. Said she would like to have the head coach in place before the expansion draft, just to be able to have their input on what the team is going to be. And that is a pretty quick timeline here. We're talking about less than a month to then have a head coach in place and get everything going. So expect news on that soon, or at least sooner rather than later. And then the last thing, RJ, is because the protection lists come out officially tomorrow. We kind of have Ottawa's, it looks like already, the 3 players that they are protecting. And we also, from Ian Kennedy over at the Hockey News, have the very interesting bit of information that it sounds like Boston is not going to be protecting Hillary Knight. Now, Hillary Knight, obviously legendary player for Team USA, was the league leading point scorer last year and second in goals. Going to be unprotected. She's going to be 36 by the time next season starts, though, RJ. Just real quick, does that make sense? Obviously, there's history there between Megan Turner and Hillary Knight, Megan Turner being in Boston previously. I mean, that sure seems like one of those things where, like, if you're an expansion club, adding somebody with the star name of Hillary Knight, and who can still produce too, seems like something you'd be very interested in doing.
Right. I mean, just from multiple perspectives, it feels like a slam dunk. I mean, that's going to be the face of the franchise right away. That's going to help you. I mean, attract fans. They probably don't need a ton of help attracting fans, but man, that's going to excite fans for sure. And then, I mean, I just think to Dylan, we went to the Fleet versus Victoire game, the PWHL game they hosted last year at Climate Pledge Arena. And I mean, of all the signs and posters and everything, like Hillary Knight was pretty large percentage of them, right?
Yeah.
She was the player, I think, more than any other individual player that people went to see. And so if you have the opportunity to start your franchise off that way, it just makes a lot of sense from a marketing perspective. It makes a lot of, I mean, the league leading scorer, that makes a lot of sense as well. And especially when the GM has history with somebody like that too. To me, it feels like the fact that she's unprotected, I wonder, and I know you brought this up right before we started recording too, is like, either it's just a slam dunk, of course you get her, or maybe there's some kind of deal that's been struck ahead of time or whatever, where, okay, we don't pick her up, but there's some compensation somewhere or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm very curious to kind of see about this setup, because
or if she like perhaps really wouldn't want to relocate or something, and that's just known.
Exactly. There's a lot of things in this that could explain why she's been left unprotected. Obviously, Boston has plenty of players that make sense to protect also. And again, if you are thinking or worrying about the age side of things. You would want to maybe protect those younger pieces that you have. But it is an interesting one. And again, without knowing what's going on behind closed doors, all we do know is that, we're getting somebody who was part of the front office in Boston, and now Hilary Knight is left available.
I think there's connect there.
I was gonna say, I think that's enough for PWHL Seattle fans to maybe start thinking about it, and maybe go ahead and let yourself be a little excited by the idea.
Yeah, and we've only got a week until the expansion draft. It is really coming up, so get into it, focus in, see who's available. And I mean, I'm trying to do all the research I can while balancing all the Kraken stuff as well. But like, we're gonna find out very soon the bulk of the players that are going to be on this team.
Right, and we're going to know, because tomorrow the protection lists are due, and then the exclusive signing window for the teams opens up for Seattle and Vancouver. So we should have the very first players for the Seattle PWHL team, certainly by the next podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have plenty to talk about there.
Exactly. So as things maybe then settle down on the Kraken side of things, we'll have more and more to talk about on the PWHL side of things. So really exciting. Really thank everybody for hanging on through this hour-and-a-half podcast here, and the deep dive into Lane Lambert and everything that he's going to bring to the Seattle Kraken coming in. One more huge shout out to Rico for being our wonderful sponsor, the law offices of Rico Tessendor. Again, if you ever need Rico, we hope you don't, but I'd say somebody out there is going to need his services. If you ever need Rico, please reach out at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area win millions of dollars in settlements. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.